As I mentioned at the outset, holidays always have a weightiness that's different than just coming on a Friday night, on a Shabbat. There's a sense of moment. And I begin preparing my sermons weeks, even months before, which I can't claim is true for the 100 Shabbat sermons I give annually. Because it feels, again, that this is a moment in which big questions need to be addressed. There is probably no bigger question than, why are we here? Let me give a little bit more context to the question of why. There is a business consultant, Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K, who has the 4th most watched TED Talk, 28 million viewers. And his TED Talk is called Why? He says that for businesses to thrive and for any kind of enterprise to succeed, it wisely begins with the question why, and from that as the center, moves outward toward the what and the how. For to answer the question, why does a business do what it does, is to understand its identity, its purpose, its motivation. He cites examples. Apple Computer. Their why is because we are nonconformist. We think differently. Their what is that they make computers. Their how is that they're user-friendly. But the why is what gives them a sense of identity, a verve, what sets them apart. He gives an example of a company that worked from the outside in, TiVo. We use the word TiVo as a verb, but the company doesn't exist now. Because when TiVo tried to say what they did, they said, we're going to be able to allow you not to watch commercials and to move forward. But they never answered the question of why. So he says, if they had said the why, the need, is that you will have more control over your time. That's our why. We want you to feel more control in your life. That would have been the inside that would have led to the outside. It's not only true, he says, for businesses, it's true for other kinds of enterprises. Many people were engaged in civil rights. What made Martin Luther King draw 500,000 people to the mall on a warm August day? Because he answered a why. The why that propelled him was the why that human justice should correspond with divine justice. And the people who came to the mall, 1/4 who were white, came because that why, that sense of human justice and divine justice needing to mesh, was important to them. It answered their why. Other people took care of the whats and the hows to allow the civil rights movement to succeed. We as Jews often don't ask why. Understandably, tonight is a celebration of belonging to extended family. In itself, that feels like a motivation to come together. But to sustain ourselves as a religious people, we need to also address the question of why. Not just for us, but for the generations after us. You know, we're a very small people and getting smaller. In America, we are about 2% of the population. In the 1950s, we were 3.5%. Country got bigger due to immigration. America looks a lot different than it did in the 1950s because of that immigration. But the Jews as a people remained, we also look different than we did in the 1950s. But our size remained largely the same as the country continued to grow. In the world, we are 0.02% of the population, which Elie Wiesel once commented on, is an accounting error that would not be malpractice. We're very small. And to remain vital, which we have for 4,000 years, is to become vital in a different kind of time. Because today it's a choice to be Jewish. It's not because they hate us that we have to be Jewish. We're blessed to live in an open society. I was recently at a Federation event, and an honoree told his story of why he was Jewish. He shared he grew up in Tustin, and growing up apparently in Lemon Heights and Tustin, he had neighbors that were told they couldn't play with him because he was a Jew. Now for him, as he described to this gathering, that was the source of his identity. He was in his 50s. But for people here who are in their 30s, 40s, 20s, you haven't experienced much anti-Semitism. If you have, it's been kind of a freak thing. It's not a reason to define who you are, because the reality of who you are in the world in which we live in America is an open society. And so what for an older generation here among us was a reason to viscerally feel connected is not so much true for a younger generation. It's also true in regard to Israel. If you're over 60, you more or less can remember the Six-Day War. When Israel's enemies had declared in advance they were going to wipe Israel out and the armies were gathering, the Suez Canal was closed, Egyptian army was on the border, the Straits of Tiran closed. That was only 22 years after the end of the Second World War, and it was not an abstraction that the Jews could get wiped out. I'm old enough to remember listening to the radio in 1967 with my father and my mother, holding our breath. If you're 75 or older, you might remember the Second World War and remember that trauma. There's the image of the soldiers coming and liberating the concentration camp, and the American soldiers saying to the emaciated inmate, "We're here, you're free." And the inmate saying, "You got here too late." And when Jews heard that story, they said, "Never again. We're going to be strong. We're going to be united." But for our young people, that's not their history. That's not their memory. It is not visceral. They in their lives, and this is uneasily heard often by an older generation for whom it is visceral. For them, Israel is strong. Israel is one of the most mighty armies in the Middle East, and that's the Israel that they have known their whole life. In Israel that can fend off the threats around it. And so it is not for most visceral that they are attached to belonging to the Jewish people because of the threats against us. And so we return to the question of why. It's not easily answered as to why. Where we usually go in answering why is to the Torah. For the Torah is our collective terrain. When Jews were spread out and didn't have a land of Israel, it was our Torah that was the soil that united us and kept us whole. But there too, there are challenges. You know, I write on Fridays Torah and tidbits. So I recently wrote one of those Torah and tidbits. A little bit of Torah. The parsha, it was only about 4 weeks ago, was Ki Teitzei, the parsha with the most laws of any of the Torah readings. It begins with the laws of war. Ki Teitzei le'milchama al oivecha. When you go out to war against your enemy, v're'ita b'shivyo, and you see among your captives, Eshet yafat to'ar, you see a beautiful woman, v'chashakta ba, and you lust for her, and then the text continues. You have to clamp down as a soldier and wait 30 days. At least that's how the Jerusalem Talmud understands it. You must allow that captive, mind you, in a time of slavery, in which women were the spoils of war. You have to allow her 30 days to mourn for her parents, from whom she has been separated, perhaps who have been killed. And during that time, she has to cut her hair and her nails so as not to be her most attractive, so that she should not be an object, but somebody who you seek to enter into a relationship with. And after 30 days and having physical intimacy, if you decide you no longer want her, you have to let her go free. She is not your property. So I wrote about this paragraph, and I got the following email back to the synagogue. Quote, according to Torah, it is moral for a soldier to rape his captive after waiting 30 days, and this is an example of high morality? Thank you for reminding me how absolutely ridiculous, irrelevant, and twisted belief in Torah is. If you're looking to make Judaism irrelevant and scare Jews further away, this topic is ideal. Please remove me from your mailing list. So the Torah is not so easy either as a foundation. I wrote back to her. I didn't know who she was, frankly. So I wrote her back later in the day the following letter. Good evening. Your email is welcomed. You have given me pause to consider what more I could and should have said in my paragraph description of Ki Teitzei. You're right. Permission to rape a woman after 30 days is still rape and immoral. And yet, such a biblical law has historical context, just as these laws were written during a time of slavery. Slavery, too, is a moral outrage for our time. And yet slavery was not only a given in the ancient world, but slavery existed as a given until the middle of the 19th century for most of the world. As economies and technology changed, people were able to say, it is not a given that people should be treated as beasts of burden. All people deserve to live free. I imagine that people might say in the not-too-distant future, medical care should be a given, not just a privilege for those who can afford it. Indeed, in many nations, including Israel, medical care for all is a given. What is right and wrong evolves, hopefully. Many of the seeds for equality of the sexes and for equal administration of justice emerge from the Torah too. The rules of war that I cited were a great moral advancement for its day. I am unaware of any other military code of the ancient world, and I emphasize ancient, that insisted on such self-restraint. And yet, the cited laws fall short of our military codes of today. I do not see the Torah's laws totally transcending time and place. Rather, I see the Torah as moving morality forward a step or two at a time, with an aspiration to see each person as created in the image of God. That aspiration is still unfolding. There is more to understand as to right and wrong and more justice to administer. And yet the Torah is a sacred document for me because of its challenge to see the world through the eyes of a caring creator parent. The Torah needs ongoing interpretation to fulfill its promise as a guide to how to live a holy life. I would welcome discussing this further with you after the High Holy Days. Please let me know if you would like to do so. So we're left with a question. The question, why? Why Judaism? What gives our faith a distinctive verve, a distinctive identity, a distinctive purpose? The Torah tells us, as I just mentioned in my response, the Torah tells us, Kedoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. It frames it in another place, Mamlechet Kedoshim, the Goy Kadosh, before the giving of the Ten Commandments in chapter 19 of Exodus. God says, and you shall be a nation of priests, a holy people. To be a priest is to be a go-between, between the people and God. To be holy, the word holy means to be set apart. Just like the Sabbath day is the first thing called holy in the Bible, set apart from the 6 days of work to give an opportunity of rest, of wholeness, and thereby elevation. It's the same word used to choose a spouse. A wedding is also kiddushin. It's to take one person from amongst all the possible choices and say, this one will be my partner, and two will be one. And together we will be potentially whole and elevated. What is distinctive as part of that why, as in Kedoshim Tihiyu, is that it's in the plural. We as a people uniquely have a teaching that God spoke to all of us at the same time, whether born Jewish or Jewish by adoption into the extended family. Only Judaism has the teaching that God revealed God's wisdom and a love letter to how to live life to an entire people at once. Every time tomorrow when we open the ark and we will rise as a community, we will be reenacting that moment of Mount Sinai. That's why when the Torah is carried around, the why of Judaism is that we have an opportunity, a responsibility to be together, striving as an extended family to live our highest selves and to model that for others. What does that mean to live our highest self? You know how our rabbis understand it? By arguing with each other and debating. We have another thing that's unique. Our religious literature is not a cookbook. The Mishnah are 6 volumes edited in Jerusalem, in Israel, in 225. They're a point counterpoint for every law but one, which gets read traditionally on Friday night, and that's the nature of a Shabbos wick for a candle. Every other law in the 6 volumes is argued, and those 6 volumes will later become, of the Talmud, 63 volumes. We are a people that debates. and that comes to an understanding of the nuance of meaning, recognizing that meaning is always unfolding and changing as times, as economy, as culture, as opportunity changes. What it means to be holy changes too. Saddleback Church represents a model of success. They are important teachers for me. They're a bit different. When they read the Bible, they know what God is saying. They don't read it in the Hebrew. Because if you read it in the Hebrew, it's many uncertainties of terminology. Every word is subject to interpretation. I once sat with my friend Pastor Rick Warren at his keyboard with many computer screens. I told him I wanted to give a sermon on the healing hand. So he typed in hand and got a concordance of about 15 different translations of different Bibles, and then was able to extract the quotes that he thought would be best suited. I honor it. I say this in no way to be other than appreciative of the wisdom of his community, but it's a very different approach than in Judaism, where when you open a page of Mikraot Gedolot, the traditional Jewish text, you have a line of Hebrew surrounded by commentaries arguing with each other what the meaning of the sentence is. And the rabbis will say, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. This and that are the words, the understandings of the ever-living God. I mentioned at the outset that I spend a lot of time thinking about the big questions. And the big question of this moment is why? Why be Jewish? Back to Saddleback. They, 18 years ago, began small groups. It's been the engine for the growth of Saddleback, where now it's a church that draws 20,000 people on their main campus, with campuses around the world at the moment. But on the main campus, they have over 25,000 people in small learning groups. Last year, we kicked it off for the first time. You may recall, 40 days to becoming your best. The Bames were kind enough to buy for everyone who participated in the congregation my new book at that time, Increasing Wholeness, as a study text to talk about how we as individuals could be more whole. I went back to Saddleback. They were thrilled with our success. We had 85 different groups, over 350 people at CBI, who made a commitment for 5 nights over 5 weeks to have a 1-hour conversation. But the man who's been their key pastor in small groups, his name is Steve Gladden. He said, rabbis come to us for advice. They know we're successful. But I'll tell you, we're successful because we started with why. Pastor Rick Warren, from the very beginning, defined that we are a purpose-driven church. And then he defined that purpose by 5 different dimensions in terms of what it means to be a member of a church. I've yet to meet a rabbi who can tell me why be Jewish. It doesn't seem like you've addressed that topic. The rabbis are all doing hows, how to have relationships, how to love, how to have families, important. But unless you answer why, you're not moving in the direction you need to. And so, as much time as I put in thinking about sermons, I put in a lot more time in this booklet. It was my summer homework. Leading a Life of Significance, Why Judaism Matters. You'll find them at the entryways for those who are hosts of groups. We have about 100 people so far participating, but I'm only kicking it off with promotion the last week or two. And we only start on Yom Kippur. And so I do encourage you to take a look at the books. You can look at them in services. And if you're a couple, you can do it with each other. You just need one other person to have as a friend to do the conversations with. If you're a couple, you can do it with other couples. If you're single, you can join a group, create a group. But the conversation is how we as Jews continue to unpack the why. For the why is, Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, you shall be a holy people, a nation of priests. But how and the what, and at the core, the why, of why and what does it mean to be a holy people, is composed of 6 thoughts: values, extended family, Torah, an acronym, that's VET, V-E-T, have an understanding, and how it becomes action, worship, Israel, and Tikkun Olam, wit. I encourage you to take high holidays forward, and with those who are your friends, deepen your own understanding of why. Why? Nothing would make me happier than to see it multi-generational, with parents with their children at the Friday night table, and grandchildren. Because ultimately we are blessed. Tonight, as I look around this room, I am blessed to be part of this extended family. I am blessed to be part of an extended family that reaches far beyond these walls, cross time and space. We have a rare opportunity to enrich our lives by living and exploring our sacred texts, by being in conversation with each other as a people, extended family seeking holiness. Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, Kadoshim Tihiyu, you commanded us, you shall be holy. That's not a status. It's always forward. It's always moving. It's never quite reached, but it is a direction that makes all the difference. We have survived as a people because we have had a sense of purpose that we need to be our best. May we be guided in your light to grow, to be our best. Amen.